call the November 26, 2018 regular meeting of the Amherst City Council to order at 7 p.m. Roll call, please.
Mr. Ventura?
Here.
Mr. Dembinski?
Here.
Mr. Cowger?
Here.
Mr. Benarski?
Here.
Mr. Nahorn?
Present.
Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Janik?
Here.
We'll stand to be led in prayer by Chaplain Nahorn and then the pledge to the flag by Sergeant at Arms Dembinski.
Please join me in bowing your heads. Gracious God, Thanksgiving being celebrated this month, we remember that the first Thanksgiving proclamation by President Washington was actually given October 3, 1789. Today we continue to give thanks for all that was, is, and will be, that we all may gather together in gratitude for the blessings we as a nation have been and continue to be afforded. And now let the words of our mouths and meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your vision. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll go to item 4 on the agenda, the consent agenda.
Minutes of the regular council meeting held November 12, 2018. Minutes of the Building and Lands Committee meeting held November 19, 2018. Minutes of the Executive Committee meeting held November 19, 2018.
Mr. Dembinski.
Move to accept the consent agenda as read.
Mr. Cowger.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda as read. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 7-0. Consent agenda is accepted. We'll go to item 5, acknowledgement of the public pertaining to items on the agenda. We have one person here wishing to speak on item 6A on the agenda. Mr. Muckenberg, please go to the microphone and state your name and your address, please.
Hi, my name is John Milcumber. I live at 524 Cherry Valley Drive in Amherst. And I'd like to take a few minutes and talk about the CCA, City of Cleveland Central Collection Agency. In 2012, the Amherst City Council approved an ordinance authorizing the treasurer to enter into an agreement with the CCA to help on tax enforcement. The reason for that was that the CCA is able to obtain Amherst City residents' federal filings and compare them to their city filings to check for accuracy. And the idea was that we would increase revenue in the city by having this enforcement arm working with us. I opposed the ordinance at that time, and after 6 years I still oppose the ordinance, and I'd like to give you a few reasons why. First reason is that ordinance authorized 2 taxing authorities to administer taxes against the same obligation. I owe 1 city income tax to the city of Amherst. I pay it, I mail it to Park Avenue. And with this scheme, I can be audited, corrected, thrown in jail by this third party. This CCA process has proven to be heavy-handed and unreliable, and I have an example to give you. The second reason I'm opposed to it is because it causes residents' personal and confidential information to be distributed unnecessarily to a third party without authorization from the residents. So my social security number, my banking information, my son who may be a minor, his social security number, he doesn't owe any taxes to the city of Amherst, but this authorization is causing that information to be sent to a third party that I don't authorize, and the residents don't have a chance to authorize. The third reason I oppose it is that the former treasurer, he gave no quantifiable projection of the potential benefit to the city. And current CCA reporting indicates there is 0 benefit to the city in the way of increased tax receipts over the past 5 years. I've asked the treasurer to confirm that data. I'm just looking at a public database from the CCA. I've gone to their website. So the clerk provided you with some copies. I apologize on their size. I took those reports, those pages right from the CCA website. Three of those documents are the 2015, 2016, and 2017 summaries. And I would refer you to the far right column, which is the balance collected and due members. One of the other pages I provided is the CCA list of member cities. Amherst shows up as a special member for this collection enforcement. And for reference, Lorraine also shows up as a special member. And I would like to compare some of the data that's available between Amherst and Lorraine. So the first point on that there's no benefit to the city, if you look at those reports, there's nothing reported for Amherst, zero, for 2015, 2016, or 2017. I don't know the reason for that. Maybe the treasurer's office has some other reports that I'm not privy to, but as far as the public record goes, there's nothing reported for Amherst. And when you look at the city of Lorraine, in 2015, they actually netted a minus $108. 2016, they netted a little over $23,000. In 2017, a little over $9,600. Those are inconsequential sums to a city the size of Lorraine, 63,000 people, 5 times the size of Amherst. Those are inconsequential to be sending my personal information out to a third party unauthorized by me. I think we're all worried about our personal information being compromised, and I would refer you to a Cleveland.com article in January 2016 indicating, quote, Rita loses personal info for 50,000 people. Rita is a similar tax collecting body in Northeast Ohio, similar to the CCA. It's public record that they lost personal information of 50,000 people. The last point I want to follow up on is that I mentioned that I think the CCA methods are heavy-handed, and the reason for that is I got a call from a friend about a month ago. And that's the most difficult to read document that's in your packet. It's actually a letter that was sent from the CCA on behalf of the city of Amherst to this resident. And so, because it's so difficult to read, I want to make the points that are in the letter here directly to you. The letter says that in agreement with the city of Amherst, CCA has obtained residents' federal income tax information for the years 2010 through 2015. So over a 5-year period they are looking at. The letter says the resident has not responded to 2 previous notices. This office is now in the process of filing a criminal complaint against the resident. Failure to pay city income taxes is punishable by a fine of up to $1,000 and a jail term of 6 months. If you are found guilty, the conviction becomes part of your permanent record and can affect your job and credit rating. If you fail to appear in court, a warrant will be issued for your arrest. Your taxable income for 2010 through 2015, and I've crossed that out there so you don't have the absolute values, but I put in relative amounts for you. So his delinquent taxes they reported were 34% of the total. They want to charge interest that is equal to 35% of the total, so equivalent to the actual delinquent taxes. And then they want to throw a penalty on of 29.8% of the total. So it's roughly a third delinquent taxes, a third interest, and a third penalty. To avoid criminal complaint, you need to pay within 10 days and provide your 2010 to 2015 federal tax returns with Schedule W-2s and 1099s. Payment and all correspondence must be directed to the CCA. The city of Amherst will not be able to assist you. So this is a letter that went out to somebody. And the real important part is, they don't owe this tax to residents of Amherst Township. So, the point of providing you this letter is to show that the CCA is not infallible. These are heavy-handed tactics, giving somebody 10 days to pay a $30,000 penalty. They said he had received 2 previous notices, which he had not. This wasn't even certified. And so the point I'm making is, I don't think we should be having these letters sent to residents or neighbors without some benefit to the city. And I can't find any benefit to the city in the public records from the CCA. So what I'm asking for is for council to rescind this ordinance and this authority for the treasurer. I don't know the exact mechanism on how that can happen, whether it's an ordinance or some other action, but this is not acceptable to me or my family, and I don't think it should be acceptable to you. This is my personal information. I pay my taxes religiously. I think the city income tax department does a good job. I have no problem with them. I support the idea of them getting additional help in the office. I don't support the idea of two tax authorities for the same tax. So I thank you for your time, and I appreciate the work of the council.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Montgomery? Mr. Miller, if you could stay up, Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Miller would like to.
Thank you, Madam President. Just briefly, what conversations have you had with our treasurer or our president of council in regards to this issue before today?
I requested the treasurer provide information on actual CCA collections.
So did you just do a records request, or did you call and say, hey, I have a couple questions?
Email.
Just an email? Did you get any response back?
No.
So,
I mean, we had an email when we sat down face to face, and I reviewed the same information, essentially.
recently?
Recently, yes.
And what did you find? Besides, I got your understanding of what's here, but what did you find with that sit down about this? Has that changed anything, or is that bad information?
That has not changed anything. That doesn't mean the information doesn't exist. It's just that I don't have it. So I don't know how the city income tax office is managing the CCA agreement. I don't have any information on that. Whether they're actively managing it, passively managing it. When you talk about this letter going to somebody in the township incorrectly, to me, I don't care if the mistake was made within the city's income tax department or whether it was made at the CCA. The point is, they're not infallible and they will make mistakes. And I don't think you should have numbers like this going out mistakenly when there's no value to the city. There's none shown. So if there's records and somehow these reports aren't the whole story, I'd be willing to listen to the whole story, but I mean, how much money do you have to take in to make this kind of thing justifiable? And the numbers we see from Lorraine, it's not justifiable to me. That's 33 cents a resident in the best year of those 3 years.
If I may
That's
follow up.
23,000 on 63,000 residents. Right?
Thank you. The question I have then would go to our treasurer. And I'd like to know where we are at with what kind of active or passive agreement we have with this. I was here when this came about, when Mr. Holman, our past treasurer, was here, and we looked at it as an opportunity to bring in collections that were due, nothing that wasn't due, or but collections that were due that were escaping our ability.
Right.
We have a small staff there. Our goal is to just get the ones who do submit their taxes and make sure that they're accurate. So the ones who choose not to, this was an opportunity to get into a very affordable agreement to allow us to collect on taxes, because your taxes are where they're at, and we may have to raise taxes down the road in the city because of shortfalls in revenue. So your taxes, because you're a faithful tax payer, your taxes will go up because you're faithfully paying them, and those who are not faithfully paying them, they're going to now escape even a bigger tax bill that we will front for that. Because all of us here are paying our taxes, you included, it sounds like. So if we can nip this, and we can prevent people from thinking that it's a good idea or it's an easy way to skip on paying city taxes, then I see this as a valuable asset and tool. And I apologize for the mistake to your friend. Those mistakes happen. I get stuff in the mail all the time, especially with my very unique name of Joe Miller.
Threatening jail time?
So, well, you know, you can threaten. I mean, they'll threaten jail.
Threaten jail time.
Right, and I understand that. And there's, you're right, it sounds heavy-handed, and I would agree with that.
So you're talking about a benefit in raising my tax, and what I'm telling you is, based on the data That's more than zero for Lorraine of 23,000. For 63,000 residents, that averages 33 cents a person. And what I'm telling you is, I want you to raise my taxes by 33 cents a person in my family. We'll give you $1 a year, so you don't send out my personal information. That's precisely my argument. And unless you can show that you're making an appreciable sum, you need to move on from this and quit exposing residents to this.
The question that I had or I guess since you threw that out there, I'll state that just to get a Giant Eagle card, we're going to get more information a lot of times than what they're getting. Whenever we work with a business or purchase something or get into agreement, especially a financial contract, our information's out there, and yes, that information has been stolen. And I'm not justifying completely what's going on, but I think that this is very a one-sided view, and what I'm hoping is going to happen is our treasurer will be able to speak to whether these numbers are accurate or whether we're actively or passively, and so maybe we could make a better decision up here
Right.
in council.
So I understand your Giant Eagle example, and that's a concern of mine. But in that case, you have a decision to make as a consumer. You can decide to expose yourself or not. I can't decide to expose myself. You made that decision for me. This council has made that decision for me, and I don't agree with it. In those cases, in all those consumer cases, I have the ability to work with those people and get that card or not. I don't have the ability to. And that's the difference.
It's a fair argument.
And if you want to talk about, I was told in 2012 by a councilman who approved this, who's no longer here, that my right to privacy was outweighed by the benefit to the community. Once again, there's no benefit to the community, so I'm not buying the argument.
So I still have that question posed to the treasurer when you're finished.
Yeah, this is going to be kind of a long answer. I really don't have any skin in the game as it relates to CCA. It was something enacted before I became treasurer. It's one of the contracts that I'm bound to comply with. That's in our office. It's true that I don't think we've even utilized the CCA up until 2018. It goes back to what we were talking about recently with our inability to sort of do these what we would call special projects or those kinds of things that we just don't have the time to do. And in fact, my conversations and dealing with Mr. Mulcumber are kind of on that same track. In fact, I think I sent you an email maybe a week or two ago that says we're in the middle of working on that I'm still working on your request based upon our conversation, because we did meet in person. I went to his house and met with him after this came up. This was last month. And we had a conversation about, sort of what we're talking about here. I don't have a full report ready for anybody, but it looks to me, just take this with a grain of salt, it looks like we've recovered under $100 in 2018 from the CCA. Now, I'm not sure that we send them any confidential information in that regard. My understanding, and again, I wasn't prepared to do this today. I'm sorry. I worked all day today. I came in and I saw I was copied on an email Sunday night. I was not prepared for any of this. All I've got are my notes of kind of what we've been working on as it relates to this thing. It looks like, whether or not it's a worthwhile endeavor, I can bring council the data as fast as I can. But I think what happened back in October or September, whenever they sent that letter, was they had sent it. I think we had sent a list of people, names and addresses, I believe is the information that we send. And we have them match up on people that were with the federal database to see who hasn't filed a tax return with the city, who had filed one with the federal but had not filed one with Amherst, as a way of trying to catch people catch what we call non-filers. And I think that was the tool that council wanted to use way back when. Turns out what they had done is mailed a bunch to people that lived in the township, people that have 44001 zip codes but are not in the city. And we all know that there's township and there's South Amherst that's also 44001. We've since I since got in contact with them and expressed my displeasure, and I don't think that would be a problem again, and I think we changed the protocol in that we send them another piece of information or something. I don't recall offhand. But I apologize, I'm not really prepared for like a full response to everything. This is just sort of, it was one of those things that we're using, you know. I think, again, take this with a grain of salt, I think we pay $190 a year. I think we've gotten, but I'm not sure about that. These are just notes, folks, I'm sorry. I mean, but it's looking like under $100 that we receive so far this year on it.
So, Mr. Treasurer, my statement here is not a criticism of you at all.
I'm not taking it as one.
And the only reason I'm here, I would have waited your response, but I thought we were moving on this other income tax issue, so this was the time to bring it up. So that's why I'm here now, instead of waiting, okay? So, just wanted to make that clear.
Mr. Miller, are you?
Yeah, I appreciate you answering the
All right,
question.
Mr.
Treasurer,
Winarski-
I do appreciate
Yeah, okay,
you
Mr.
as well.
Winarski, then Mr. Hanson, and then Mr. Kaminski.
Thank you, Madam President. I just go right to the, well, I guess I'll throw it out generally. As I recall, we're subscribing to just a small component of what CCA offers.
I believe that's
And
correct.
that was just a comparison.
Yes.
And as I recall, it's sent back to us and we act on it. I don't believe we employ CCA to do any of that, what you call the letter sending stuff.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I mean,
And I'm working from memory, so this is obviously gonna have to play out over the course of a week, you know, with the questions we have.
I looked at the 2012 minutes, and clearly, it was clear in 2012, and it's clear from this letter, that the CCA instructs the taxpayer not to contact the City of Amherst Tax Department, that's out of their hands now. And that was clear back in 2012 when this decision was made. And it is for, in fairness, they're called the Central Collection Agency, but it's more than a typical collection agency, because it's not collecting what the City of Amherst tells it to collect. It's actually making its own determination of what should be collected. So you have two bodies that can determine what should be collected from you. I find that inconsistent. I think we should put our emphasis on shoring up our income tax department. You can find a way to send mailings out to new residents from a real estate transfer list.
Right.
You don't find changes in the residents.
To conclude my question.
Portion.
I'd just like to ask, could we get a revision or maybe a summary bullet point? What are we subscribing to? How much are we paying? What are the expectations? Did they overstep their bounds sending out these letters? I don't know. It'd be a good refresher course for me. So maybe sometime over the next week or two,
Sure.
if you just some bullet points, what are we subscribing to? How much, you know, just what I
We'll do.
described.
Yeah, I
I
wrote
need
down
to
some
educate
kind of what are the
before I can really-
mechanics of it? How, you know, that kind of thing.
Right.
So,
Okay. Thank you. That's all, Madam President.
Mr. Van Trump.
So the treasurer's response sort of made my ears perk up a little bit. You said that you looked at 2018, we paid, as far as you know, 190, and we've made about $100 from this.
I don't know. Again, I'm looking at this.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I'm kind of caught in the middle of my research on it, if you will. So
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
don't
trying
want
to give
to
you
be
as
on
much
the spot.
data as I can. But
What's our contractual obligation with these people? Do you know?
let me look and see if I have a copy of it with me.
Oh, I didn't mean to make you pull anything out there.
Well, we spoke before, I think Treasurer mentioned that you have to put in a request to cancel this. For instance, you can't cancel it now, you have to cancel it. I'm sorry.
That's right. There's a
You have to
window
try
or
to
something.
Cancel next year.
It has to be an action of council, does it not?
That's correct. Oh shoot, hang on. I want to say it's like. Oh, shoot. Give me a minute. I'll look for it, folks.
All right, that's
Well, maybe
that's
what we can do is I'd like to propose that be in the information that you provide.
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I have a couple other really quick questions. Would your additional staff be able to partially at least solve the problem of us not having the manpower, woman power to take care of this kind of double checking ourselves? Did you mention something along those lines?
Well, no, actually doing the communicating with the CCA is one of those
Okay.
kinds of things we can never seem to get around to doing. At least it seemed that way until we put a little bit more of a focus on it this year. So maybe it was because we put a focus on, I don't know. I really don't know where the ball was dropped,
All right.
you know?
Well, this scares me a little bit. I'll be honest with you. We have residents come up every now and then. I always love it when residents come up, even if it lets us answer questions for them that they don't have all the information on. But rarely do I have a resident come up and talk about things and present research to me that makes me concerned that we made the wrong move. And this, at first glance, kind of makes me think that. So looking at this not only from an issue of privacy, which is, I mean, that's a serious issue, but just looking at it as a capitalist, as a business owner, as somebody who wants to look at profit and loss. If we're paying $190 a month or a year, we made $100 off of this, it doesn't sound worth it to me. I'd love to get more information about it, and if that is in fact the case, I would question whether this is necessary at all, just from a budgetary standpoint in terms of us spending that much money and how much we're getting back from it. That's all.
Okay, Mr. Dembinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Part of my request, actually, to the Treasurer's Office was similar to Mr. Van Truen's. If we could find out what our contractual obligation was, how long it was, or what we can do to get out of it. But I can provide some information to answer some of your questions, though, too. So the reason you don't see Amherst on the 15, 16, and 17 forms is because it was not until October of 2017 that it was fully completed between Amherst and the CCA. So I actually had reached out to the Treasurer's Office last October with similar type questions, asking where were we, et cetera. And they had said, well, it's taken us 5 years, but things are finally finalized. So that's why you don't see it during those time periods. I then contacted them again in March or April of this year, I forget which, I apologize, and said, well, where are we now that things have been set up, finalized, we've been working with them, and they had said, well, good news, we actually aren't recovering money. And that's good because that means that the Treasurer's Office is doing a good job at making sure that they've contacted all the necessary residents and they're collecting all the taxes that they should be. So congrats on that, that's a good thing. And then I wasn't on council in 2012, but I thought that we did not pay a yearly fee. I thought the deal was we would sign up for them. They would, if they found something, they would collect those taxes we were unable to, and then they would get a portion of that. I don't remember what that portion was, but that's how I remember the contract. So I look forward to the more information from the Treasurer's Office, but I just wanted to provide you the information that I knew about it. And thank you for coming and voicing your
Thank you, and I understand your point, and I was thinking about the point that maybe we weren't actively pursuing this in 2015, 16, 17.
Yeah.
But I said to myself, I was told by a councilman that my right to privacy was outweighed by the benefit to the city. And the city didn't even execute, from what we can tell, for 5 years. So how important was it to the city? So I think that itself proves the point as well. So, thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak for the first time? Mr. Chairman.
Question on the letter, the quality, copy quality is not very good here in terms of what we can see. Mr. Pecora, I guess I have a question for you.
Sure.
How often are these ignored? Do you have any idea, or do you have any sense of whether this is legitimate in terms of,
I'm sorry.
I mean,
How
not
often
being
are-
able to see the quality of what's written here? I don't know what, I can't read these first 3 paragraphs here.
I can't, my copy is even worse, but I imagine Mr. Ramsey's indicated that there was an error causing some sort of mailing of letters to individuals outside of the jurisdiction
Right.
that share our zip code. So I would, Mr. Ramsey saying that happened, and then that's something that's happened, so.
Yeah, that alone kind of raises a red flag for me in terms of how they're handling.
You mean the quality of the letter or the?
No, the way they're like sending, these types of letters to people that don't even live in the city.
So the quality of the letter, my friend authorized me to provide you the letter without any blackout there. I didn't want to do that. It was sent to me as a text, and so it's a folded up letter. He took a picture of, I took a picture of. On my phone, I could read it clearly, and that's what I read to you was that letter from my notes right here.
Oh, okay. But thank you for bringing this to our attention. I think it definitely warrants a closer look at the data.
Right.
Obviously that Mr. Ramsey is going to provide for us, but I think we really need to take a a serious look as to whether, like you said, any benefits from this are coming out of this relationship. So,
Is that complete, Mr. Jarrett?
yes, thank you, Madam
Is
Chair.
there anyone else wishing to speak for the first time? Okay. Mr. Miller and then Mr. Van Truren.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Treasurer, if you could just add to that list of notes that you're compiling as to what we're looking for. In my understanding, and I think Mr. Dominski, I wish I had your memory, that as you said that, things became clear from the way I heard it as well, and I think that's pretty darn close to how I remember it. This was a no fee, the fees would be added after. My understanding also is that we would not submit any information. We would just be submitting who's filed and who hasn't. Then it would be up to this division to follow up and compare and request an audit of their tax information to show that there was no taxable income that should be paid to our city. And they would do all the legwork. That was another reason I think we got behind this. And they would be doing all the requests. If you could, Mr. Ramsey, if you could find out the number of households that have been identified in our city by CCA in this first go around, because it sounds to me like it's just been a year now and we're just getting back into this. We had asked, and I had inquired as well, where we've gone with this since our last treasurer brought it up. And then also, just in case, just to reiterate, the contract information, like as in cost, I don't believe there is a cost to us, to the city. But I do believe we get a portion back of any income taxes that were supposed to have been collected. I think those are two key pieces. And then the final thing that we could find out is when does this transfer? And I believe I'm a big privacy rights person, so I would support your interest in wanting to keep your information private, and I get that, and I do understand that we're in a society where we give up information quite a bit and we don't realize we're doing it because the fine print's so small a lot of times. But I think the final piece is when does information leave the city of Amherst? When are we lawfully allowed to turn over information, social security numbers, tax form, whatever, ID numbers, and EINs and any of that we have to this agency? Because I believe this agency gets the information and drives that information. I don't think we do. But well, I guess we'll find out. So those are the things that I'm curious about, just to make sure that that is what Mr. Montgomery is saying is truly happening when it comes to the direction of information, private information as well. And I would support protecting it.
Okay, so can I respond to that? Just, I understand that I have to provide my personal information to the city of Amherst. Well, that's a given. I don't have a problem with that. But what's happening, I believe, is that it's not that Amherst is sending this information, it's that CCA is able to grab my federal record and bring it in. And that contains even more information that's not relevant to the city of Amherst taxing authorization, and they're matching it. So I don't know, the city of Amherst is clearly not giving them a federal record, they're giving it their own way, because they're a larger city. I think you have to have more like 250,000 people to be able to grab those federal records.
Right, but are they pulling it from our database, or is the CCA, which I believe is pulling it from somewhere else? So we wouldn't be actually providing any of that personal data is where I'm going with this. I don't believe we are, but I'm sure the treasurer's going to let us know in the next time around. He'll let us know who's giving up that information and how is the CCA getting it. Are we giving it to them? And also, I believe they're only comparing and red flagging those who do not file with us. So if you're in the city of Amherst and you're filing taxes, your information is not going to be grabbed because it's already been filed.
So
That's my understanding. Again, I could be wrong.
So my understanding is they're able to compare our filings here against the federal to determine if they're accurate or not.
Can we
Whether
find
or not
out?
he has an administrative workaround that he only does non-filers, I don't know. But I believe that
Okay.
ordinance and that legislation allows them to compare our existing taxpayers as well, to make
Yeah.
sure that they're legitimate.
And that's something that I'm sure he's going to come back and let us know that his department will. Thank you. No more questions. Thank you, Madam President.
Okay, Mr. Van Truren and then Mr. Cow.
Thank you to Mr. Dembinski for providing information from the agency saying that it was you said good news that they hadn't collected any money for us at all? I'll be honest,
As of March or April.
I mean, if I had an investment manager and he said, hey, good news, I haven't made you any money at all, I'd fire him. I mean, and just for simplicity's sake, if we're not collecting any money on this at all, we don't need to pay anything in order to get a pat on the back and say you're doing a good job. We know we're doing a good job. So I would love to learn about exactly how much we're making off this. This was presented, if I remember correctly, it was presented to us as a way for us to collect more tax revenue. And if we're not, I mean, a pat on the back isn't really worth it. You guys are doing a good job. I mean, the privacy concerns alone, I think, don't justify that. So that's all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cowden.
The question I have is, seeing this letter, is there any way that we can have someone from the CCA come before council and explain how this happened, why it happened, and exactly what they're doing to, I mean, it doesn't seem like anyone in this room has 100% of the answers. Is there any way that we can request someone from the CCA to come before us, explain how this letter went out, how the mistakes were made, and what they're doing to not have this happen again, and provide us with information that apparently is not available at the present time?
Mr. Treasurer.
I would just say, give me 2 weeks, come back as part of my report for the next council meeting. I'll try to have answers to all of these questions, and then we can go from there. I found the contract, I gave it to Mr. Pecor for him to look at. I think it has something to do with July 1st as a deadline.
Yeah, July
to
1st,
withdraw.
right. So if we wanted to extricate ourselves out of the contract, we would have to provide the city of Cleveland notice by July 1st, our intent to end the contract by December 31st.
As a practical matter, if council doesn't want us to do anything with it, we can always, we honor what, we're here serving the city, so, council, if council says we're done with CCA, don't do that anymore, then that's what we'll do at the office, But let me try to get you as much information as I can. I only had it partially together. I'm sorry, I've been, working on that. This other, really, the pending legislation was really what had my attention for the longest time. But I'll try to get you some answers by my next report.
Okay, we'll make sure that goes on the agenda. Thank you very much, Mr. Mulcumber.
To Treasurer Ramsey, I'm concerned about just taking executive action because we have different executives, treasurers here all the time. And when we went through this in 2012, the treasurer at the time told us he was only planning to look back a year on taxpayers to see if they filed or not filed. In this case that we have here, they went back 5 years. So I believe based on the conversations we had, that they went back even further than the previous treasurer's intent. So that's why I think we should get rid of it total. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on any item on the agenda? Yes, Mr.
Hi.
Van
I'm sorry to drag this out. I want to commend Mr. Mulcumber for coming up here, and that kind of research and dedication is much needed on council as well. I think a person like yourself would do a great job up here. I just wanted to say, I don't know you, but I just wanted to tell you that. Very, very good job, very thorough work.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ventura. Anyone else? Seeing no one else wishing to speak, item 6, ordinances and resolutions, first reading. Item 6A, please.
An ordinance establishing the salaries and benefits of the permanent part-time tax assistant, 1, and setting the pay rate, terms, and other conditions of employment, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Dembele.
Move to send item 6A on to the second reading.
Thank you. Mr. Winarski.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second to send item 6A on to the second reading. Comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Ventura?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 6A is sent on to the second reading. Item 6B, please.
An ordinance approving and accepting the dedicated improvements for the reserve at Beaver Creek subdivision, phases 1 and 2, and approving the subdivision plats therefore.
Mr. Mayor.
Council had asked last week to find out through the building department if all the bonds and fees were properly taken care of, and they have responded with a letter that says they have been, and they're up to date. And also, the building department has said that they have looked at the punch list. The two things that they've brought to our attention are extremely minor, and they agreed that we should go ahead with this process and dedicate this plat and the improvements, and that if worst case came to worst, there would be no occupancy permits given for any of these houses if something isn't completely finished, either the lift station, and there was one other small item, I think the gas lines or something. So if any of that's not done, they just won't issue a occupancy permit. So we're pretty safe, and I would agree, and I would recommend that we go forward with this.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had the same issue at the Quarry Lakes, and my understanding is all the punch lists were taken care of, everything was done, and occupancy permits were given. No issue, no hang up. So I don't see why a track record like that of continuing to follow up and take care of their business the proper way should be denied at this point. Thank you. No further comments.
Thank you. Mr. Dembinski.
Move to send item 6B on to the second reading.
Mr. Winarski.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second to send item 6B onto the second reading. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janet?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 6B is sent on to the second reading. We'll go to item 7, ordinances and resolutions, second reading. Item 7A.
An ordinance approving the 2019 interim budget and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Cowger.
Make a motion to pass item 7A on to the third reading.
Mr. Nahorn.
Second, please.
There's a motion and a second to send item 7A onto the third reading. Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Madam President. Did we get those questions answered that Councilman Dembinski asked?
Yeah, I'd made a couple phone calls and left some messages, but the three contingency items, one is stormwater. That's something, honestly, it just, you never know complete what you're going to need for stormwater improvements or emergencies. There is no dedicated fund or revenue stream for stormwater, so that's just a really good place to put some money to keep aside for stormwater problems. The capital outlay last year, that was a new item. The rules have changed what capital outlay is, and the auditors that does our CAFR and all had done some changes, so we don't completely have enough money to put for all the capital outlay projects that might come up. So this is just in case within one of the other budgets within the general fund we miss something within capital outlay, it's one we can use for any of those departments. There's some bigger dollar amounts that pertains to capital outlay. The way we used to do business has changed. And the new program, that's one that really could possibly go. It's run its course, but we do have some ideas in the future. That was Pierre Foods, and there was a tax incentive with the past administration, and that's how that was funded. It was a new program to help bring jobs and economic development within the city. So there are some ideas out there that we might have some programs like that in the future, so that's just a good place to have that money. If for some reason council didn't want that there, we could do without that one if we had to. I would really like to keep it in the interim budget, and if I look at it harder and decide there's not going to be anything needed in the final budget, I might remove that then. So that's those three items.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the answers.
Mr. Dubinsky.
Thank you. Thank you to the mayor and the auditor's office for answering all my dumb questions and trying to get me satisfied on that. One thing I will point out, even if, some of that I could see going either way, but even if we do end up having any kind of a purchase over 50 grand, it still comes before council. So there's 160 grand, 600 there, I believe, but it can't all, we still have an idea of where it's all going, so I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear him. Did you say yes?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
Sorry.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Narski?
No.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-1. Item 7A is sent on to the third reading. Item 7B, please.
An ordinance authorizing the purchase of software upgrades for the finance and utilities departments at a cost not to exceed $150,000.
Mr. Dubinsky.
Move to send item 7B on to the third reading.
Mr. Calvert.
Second.
Mr. Miller.
Mr. Auditor, could you answer the questions we had on this item in regards to an ordinance needed or for the bid?
So the law director and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about this, about you leaning towards us going to bid.
Yeah.
I think we're still awaiting an answer on that, so.
Yeah, my department's reviewed this. Mr. Bukovic was kind enough to send me some sample ordinances or ordinances from other municipalities and other contracting authorities. And none of them were one was a statutory municipality that authorized such a contract without bidding. However, as I was looking at that law director's legal research in his memorandum, he points to 307 86, which again, as I stated before, pertains to county commissioners, and then he cited to in any contracting authority. Well, and I don't mean to be critical of that particular law director, but if you looked at 307.92, contracting authority is defined, which means any board, department, commission, et cetera, of the county, or any agency on behalf of the county. So this Ohio Revised Code spells it out. And I cannot find anything for the life of me that would allow us to do this without bidding. And I've tried and understand the benefits of actually proceeding without this bid, but the law requires us to bid this. Perhaps Mr. Miller, when he goes to Columbus, could address this. So.
Just to follow up on that, after looking at this and looking at what we're trying to do, I wholly support the money savings and the ability to do this under the same company, and I would prefer not to have to bid it out, but I also believe, just like you do, that we have a duty to the citizens to be as transparent and be held accountable to the ordinances that we have on file that match up with the ORC. So, yeah, would we probably be better off in this situation not bidding it? Maybe, probably. But I also believe that we have a duty and a due diligence, and once we go down that track, we don't go back. So,
right.
I will.
Is that complete?
Yes, thank you, Madam President.
Further comments or questions? Mr. Auditor.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Law Director, so I'm trying to find the balance between what is considered an upgrade versus going out to bid for a brand new solution. Right, so our office had worked with Mr. Bukovic to look at several different options, and we determined it best to upgrade the current platform versus looking at multiple new products, then which we would definitely have decided to go to bid before even brokering this conversation. So that's where I think we're trying to tout the line of what's the right thing to do, and while I think the IT manager, Mr. Bukovic, and I are of the belief that it will be more costly to go out to bid if we were to buy an entirely new financial software and utility software. So you're, instead of upgrading, you're ripping out entirely and converting data to a system that may be speaking an entirely different language, and it's going to be much harder to complete, and it's going to be much more costly and potentially a longer drawn-out project. This project's already quoted for 9 to 12 months for the upgrade. So I think we're missing out on valuable time to get the new budgeting tools up and running and get some of the electronic functionality up and running, PO processes, time card processes, direct deposit, emailing paychecks and stubs and things of that nature. So that's where I would come back to the law director and ask, you know, from an upgrade perspective versus going out solely for a net new product, does this still fall within that?
Well,
that window?
I guess my question is if this is an upgrade of an existing system, are there other contractors or other suppliers of the upgrade, for instance, or any purveyor, anyone who could provide this upgrade at a less expensive? I don't know the answer to it.
Right.
If it's simply that you create the bid to reflect the need for the upgrade, there may be very well only one bidder. And it might be the group that you're talking about. So I'm not suggesting that you have to bid out to rip out and replace.
Got it.
You can bid to upgrade what you're presently doing.
Got it.
So I'm not sure, as far as the technology you're talking about, whether or not someone else can provide that technology upgrade. I don't know the answer to it. It very well may be that it's the group that you're with. The issue is that we're bound by the law, and we have to follow the law.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
SSI, it is their proprietary tool. Now, whether or not there are other resellers out there in the IT world, that's fairly common. Now, for this particular product, I have no clue if there are other resellers, and that is something we can look at. Because a reseller, you can also, sometimes you can purchase from a reseller and pick another implementer, right? So there are other options, I just don't know in this particular case.
So the caveat is so long as it's truly just an upgrade, it's an upgrade of the existing system.
Correct.
And we're not purchasing, we're not seeking something else from a different, let me rephrase it. We're seeking to upgrade what we have.
Correct.
And there's a way of providing specifications of that upgrade.
Okay.
And if there's someone out there that can provide this product at a less, a less price than your people you're trying to contract with, then we have to go with that group.
Got it.
Chances are there will only be one group that will bid on this. So.
Okay. Fair enough.
So
Is
it's
that all,
a spec.
Mr., excuse me, is that all, Mr.?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Madam President.
Mr. Mayor, but Mr. Calgar and Mr. Winarski also would like to have the floor. Do you want to add something to Mr. Patak's information?
I just want to make a comment that we've heeded the law director's advice, and we are already working on specifications. I would like to leave the ordinance as is and not requiring bidding. We're going to do what the law requires, but if some miracle comes around that we do find a way that we're able to do this as an upgrade, I would still like to leave that option open. But we are working on specifications, and at this time, that is the plan.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Calgar?
Nothing right now.
Okay, Mr. Winarski?
Thank you, Madam President. Real briefly, if we do find that this needs to go out to bid, we just have to modify the language to read that as solicit a bid. Refresh my memory, though, that cannot happen in the third reading. We can only modify language in the second reading, first or second reading.
We'd go back to this.
It would have to be sent
It
back.
would
Third
be
and then
sent
go
back
back
to
to
this.
I guess it would depend on whether or not we're required that language in the actual ordinance.
Right. But if it does get changed, I've just,
If it does need change, then you're right, it needs to be sent back to the second reading for the modification.
okay, my memory was good once. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other comments from Mr. Winarski?
No.
Mr. Miller?
So would we be better off, Mr. Law Director, amending this in some form to say it's going to be poorly.
In the event bidding is required, it shall be bid.
Right, and so if we amend it, then we've got ourselves the ability, or now you have the ability, Mr. Mayor, to handle this in, winter break or whenever, if we're not in session, you can take care of this.
Does the language bidding need to be in there? I mean, the law requires me to bid it already, so I don't know if our local ordinance would need to state that.
The law would require it to be bid.
as it already is.
That's correct, but I think what Mr. Miller's saying is saying adding language now, in the event bidding is required, it
Yes.
shall be placed for bid.
Yes. Yes.
I think that's what he is suggesting.
Right.
Yeah.
But does that ordinance, the way it reads now, need to be changed in
Well,
order for us to bid it?
If I'm not mistaken, our ordinances typically state that if we're gonna put it out for bid, we put it out for bid. That it's in the
Typically,
actual,
but I don't
it's
know
in the
if it
actual
needs to.
ordinance. What I think Mr. Miller's idea might be actually a very good idea, is that in the event bidding is required,
Oh, okay.
Yes,
in the event it's
Very
required.
good, I like that.
It's to help. I mean,
Very
it's
good.
actually giving you more tools.
Okay, can we have one
Thank you.
person speaking at a time? Thank you.
So I guess that,
I would then, I
you
would
would agree?
suggest, I would agree with Mr. Miller's suggestion
Okay.
that we put that language in now, so we don't have to come back. to the
I'd be
second.
willing to make that amendment if it's still possible on the floor.
Should we withdraw the motions to make the amendment, Mr. Law Director?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Calgar?
I'll
Mr.
withdraw my
Calgar.
second.
Okay.
I
very
withdraw
good.
my motion.
Okay. What changes, Mr. Law Director, are you gonna propose some changes right now?
I was ready to email my assistant law director to add language which would say, in the event bidding is required by law, it shall be placed up for bid and awarded, our typical bidding language.
Which section will it be put on? Added?
Of the actual ordinance itself here.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that Madam Clerk has the
It would be under section 1.
section 1. Okay.
You would add that language under section 1 of the ordinance, so.
Recognizing that this might have to be sent out to bid.
Correct.
All right.
So that would be my amendment. As stated by the law director.
Okay. Amendment by Mr. Miller. Mr. Winarski.
I'll give it a second.
Second. Motion and a second to amend as stated by the law director, section 1. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dombinski?
Yes.
Mr. Calgar?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Item 7B is amended. Mr. Dembinski,
Move to send item 7B as amended on to the third reading.
thank you very much. Mr. Calvert.
Second.
Motion and a second to send item 7B as amended on to the third reading. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Van Turen?
Yes.
Mr. Dembinski?
Yes.
Mr. Calgar?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 7B is sent on to the third reading as amended. We'll go to item 7C, please.
An ordinance creating within the city of Amherst, Ohio, a position for a full-time civilian administrator in the city of Amherst, Ohio Police Department, and establishing the salary, terms, and other conditions of employment.
Mr. Dembinski,
Move to send item 7C on to the third reading.
thank you. Mr. Calvert.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to send item 7C onto the third reading. Comments or questions, please? Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. This is, I've thought a lot about this position, and I've gone back and forth, and I appreciate that now a couple hours that our chief has spent with me and the phone calls of other people I've spoken to in the city on this issue. This is something that has been stated, that there will always be need for training. This position will always have a full-time set of responsibilities. I really believe that we should be sunsetting this. This is something we should put out there to where the chief has to come back and say, you know what, we did this for 3 years, and this is what we've accomplished. Because a lot of this creation of this position is based on a lot of promises of work to be done a lot of promises of training to be completed, timelines to be met. And I really believe in this situation, for this type of position that's not in the bargaining, it's not civil service, that is appointed solely by the chief, I think they should come back to us and say, this is who I hired, this is what we did, and this is what we accomplished. And I'd like to see an ordinance that continues this for X amount of years, whatever the next council decides at that time may be. And this is one of those where we don't always have this money being dedicated to this position unless they can prove it's needed and warranted. I mean, that's a good fiduciary duty that we have, to keep an eye on the costs here. I understand his need for it. He's laid it out there in such a way that I believe that right now we're a little bit behind and ground needs to be made up. That restructuring is going to happen, but I just don't see this without removing other positions truly out of the police department. This just continues to add positions and budget. And so, I mean, may not make it past my speaker here, but I'd really like to amend this. Says that this position will be created on a 5-year term, and we'll have to come to council for it to continue, this position to remain. So in better legalese terms than I just did there, because I'm struggling with it, this issue, and we just would like to see this done differently. But I think the sunset clause or one method of that. So how could we word that, Mr. Pecor? You could help bail me out. How could we set up a position where we're willing to, I mean, we budget yearly. We say, yep, this is the money we'd like to see spent. But I'd like to see in this particular case, a position that we can, you haven't convinced us after 5 years or 3 years.
So you're saying that you would like as council to require the police department to reappear within a certain time period to justify the position?
Correct. Absolutely. And say, here's what we've accomplished with it. These are all the things we've had done. This is what the city has benefited from. Please give this position, civil administrator, continue this position for another 5 years, or council may make it permanent that time. They won't have a Joe Miller up here, worried about creating a position that will never go away, or that could be.
Right. I think you're kind of melding into administrative role versus legislative role, and legislation is to pass legislation and to create these positions. You're asking to give council the authority to then take away that position. I'm not quite sure council has that authority to do that.
We do that with contractors, we do that with vendors, we do that with, in that situation. So my question would be, are we able to, just like we would a contract, your services are no longer needed after so many years, we're no longer going to. I mean, we're going to end the contract with the school system in regards to our television broadcast and our support of that financially here. It's not a city employee, but we're asking to be creating a city employee without civil service, without a bargaining unit, who would come to the table and say, this is why we want this bargaining position to remain. And you, on this side, would have to tell the bargaining unit on this side, this is why we don't believe that we should have this position anymore, and we want to remove it because we don't need it anymore. There's nothing there to do that. We are the last bastion right now, and this vote is going to decide a position that has no. So if there is no way to do it legally, then I guess,
I'm just concerned about
I'm
just concerned myself about the role of council and the role of administration as far as management of employees and what precedents we might set if we do that. Council has the right to say no to the position as far as creating it, but as far as taking it away, I'm not quite sure council has that authority.
So once we approve a position, we can't set a position based on
Well, it's a legislative versus executive function, and the question that I have, and I don't have it squared away in my mind, but I have a feeling that it's an executive function after a position's been created to administer that position and to determine, make recommendations to council as to increases in wages and things of that nature. But as far as doing away with the position, I'm not sure if that council has that authority sitting here today.
So should we have done a budget line item for this position so that this particular pay, this particular amount being budgeted for this position would be in a line item, and therefore we could say we don't approve this budget based on that line item? I mean, because we're not, executive's job is to fill the position, execute the laws that we write.
Right.
So,
It's true.
so if we write a law saying that we're creating, whether it be a committee, a position, what have you, and we're willing to give it this much money, instead of every year having to come back and justify it, I'm just asking, how about give it some time, give a position 5 years to where you can set through and get into motion a full long-term set of goals, and then you should have time to complete that and come back and say, look it. And by then we're probably going to be sitting on another chief maybe, and that chief may come in and say, I want to keep it, but I want to use it for pouring coffee and washing cars and doing whatever. No, but seriously, right? I mean, it may not be needed. Why not have them justify this investment into a city in a position that we?
I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure. I'm not, presently able to answer whether or not it's legal. I don't think it's legal for city council to, after establishing a position, to then require the executive branch to get rid of that position. I don't think that's.
So we can't deadline or sunset anything we.
I don't think so. And the other thing is, I'd like to hear what the person's requesting this, what their position would be for council to consider that. So number one, I'd have to determine whether or not it's legal. But number two, if it was legal, I think council would have to hear from the executive about that need, that sort of thing. So.
I guess I guess defer to who's here from the administration.
Well, you mentioned that you talked to the chief, Mr. Miller. When you asked that question, what did he say?
He wasn't too privy on being told that he would have to return for this. Once he creates it, that's what he wants to do, and he wants to handle that position the way he wants to handle it. And that's fair. As an administrator, when I was on that side of the coin, maybe not in public life, but in private, I wouldn't. But I was told all the time, positions you can or cannot hold or maintain based on your budget. So I would go to my boss and say, this is my budget, and they would tell me whether I could have those positions, supervisory positions, management positions under me. So I would have to go back and say, hey, you know what? The numbers aren't there, the need isn't there, I couldn't prove it to my boss, and therefore, and we are the ones that would say, hey, we cut the check. So yeah, I would say we do have an ability to say yea or nay about a position, about a particular position. But I don't know, maybe that's why I'm throwing it out to you. I'd really love to see it, and I wish we would have done this a little earlier, but that's on me for not figuring out a way to support this effort and yet still have that check. I want that check. I want that transparency. I want them to be able to come back in front of the whole city and say, see, here it is, right? Instead of, because it could be buried. We would never know whether that position was something that came to fruition the way they saw it, and is it the right investment? 5 years, that's $500,000.
Right.
So not chump change.
Right.
I have 3 more people that wish to.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll you. I'm sorry. I'm finished.
Mr. Calgary, then Mr. Jeffries, then Mr. Van Truen.
I think that if council has questions on how this position is doing and the need for this position, that those could be asked during any budget hearings. We could ask that, since this is not a civil service position or a bargaining position, that would definitely be an opportunity for council to inquire as to how the position is working out and the need for the position, since council does approve the budget and could have a say at that time. So I really don't see where this needs to have any other restrictions other than that at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Miller, just a couple things couple questions I'd like to ask you. First off, the chief would have been here tonight, but he is under the weather, so I did text him this morning, but he is a little under weather. Otherwise, he would have been here tonight.
Sure.
Would not have been his choice not to be here, just to answer these very questions. But in your time talking to him, did he not absolutely positively, as I know the chief, absolutely positively, and I'm guessing the answer is no, but did he not demonstrate to you the need for this position? Did he not talk enough about the changes in the department? How that department constantly changes, how you brought up training specifically. In my mind, and I'm not part of the police department, they know what they do, and I thank them for what they do, but training never goes away, in my mind. At least that's the way I look at it. Maybe you look at it differently, maybe you see a finite end to it. I don't know, that's my question to you. What part of his description of this job led you to believe that there would be an end point, that the functions of that job would end at some time? Was there something that he indicated that led you to believe that? Or?
No, I think if you believe in what you're attempting to create and what you're attempting to do, I don't believe you're going to arm the person who on the other side may not be supportive of that with any information that would do just that, arm me with more ability to say no to this. So no, I don't think he's, during any of the time, and there was a lot of time that I spent here in chambers and at his office and so forth. And I get it. I get what he's trying to do. You know, I work, the industry I work in, there's training all the time, but I can promise you that the same budget when we have a veteran staff versus when we have a young staff is absolutely, should be different. And unfortunately, when you get into sometimes these bureaucracies, whether it be law enforcement or education or any of them, you tend to create something in the bureaucracy for the need at that time, and I'm not disputing that. And I don't believe that he was disingenuous at all. I mean, and I do support everything that the law enforcement does.
And I wasn't, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt
Right.
you, but I wasn't trying to say he was disingenuous with you. I wasn't implying.
No, and I don't think
Or
he
you
was
would have.
either. And
Excuse me.
And that, no worries. Thanks for the clarification. I think the one thing that we find is that once you create a position in a bureaucracy, that position and the people in it will continue to make sure that that job is needed. I mean, I don't mean to come up with a Peter principle here, and but it's kind of how that works. And so that job things will be found to make sure that that's there. Nobody that takes this job and says, you know what, I'm going to do all the work in 5 years because I know the job's done and I'm going to be gone. If I knew that, maybe I would say, well, I wouldn't see the work getting done. But I just, right now, there's other ways that we could have done this to make sure that that his needs were met, especially in the immediate term, where he has a lot of new law enforcement officers. He needs to reshuffle staff and train the dispatchers. And I get that. He's moving stuff over to a new software piece. But once that's done, it becomes, what is it that I want to train on and what do I want to do new? And we're keeping on maybe possibly a $100,000 job after a couple of years of it taking care of what it was supposed to be doing. We're going to keep that position. And that's not a loaded gun either. That's a desk job. So if we need to move that person to the street or move them into a position because of a shortfall and one of the officers leaves for tour of duty like we've seen in the past, or God forbid gets injured like we've just seen most recently, we can't move that person into slots to fill or to support and shuffle. We just have a desk job. We don't have anybody to do that. And I expressed that to him, and he said that they'll be better served to fulfill what he wants done in the role and without the sworn-in position, without, as I call it, a hired gun in that position. And that was his argument. And I said, after working this through, I believe that the way to do this and to meet his needs that he has immediately and some of his long-term goals is to set it up this way. And it just, I apologize that all the other things got in my way of sitting down with the chief again, or with Mr. Pecora. I apologize for short noticing that. I mean, I know it's hard enough to do your job as it is, let alone, hey, can you legally give me some thoughts on something you haven't been prepared for? So, but we got the votes, or the votes are there. I just really would hope that after I'm gone, that it was needed, that he does come back. Maybe doesn't need to have this piece of amendment put in it or something to that effect, but I really believe that there's other ways to do this.
Mr. Jeffries, anything more?
To answer your questions, by the way.
Thank you very much. I would just like to add my piece on this is the chief has absolutely demonstrated, in my mind, the administration's mind, that this is a position of need. It's a position that's going to continue. It's going to continue to be needed. I would absolutely disagree on respectfully of your position.
Sure.
For council to be able to, and I think the law director has addressed that, I would be totally against that. I don't really believe it's something that's needed. That's something that certainly could be administered by the chief, who runs a very good department, keeps our citizens very safe. I have full faith in him. The administration has full faith in the chief that if this position is approved by you folks, that he will administer it, we will hire the right person, and that person will do a bang-up job, and we'll all be very satisfied. So, into my comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Ventura.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I would argue that an officer's training is probably the most important thing that officer carries with him or her out there on the streets, even more important than, any piece of equipment, including a loaded gun. I understand Mr. Miller's point. Mr. Jeffries, so as administrators, yourself, the chief, the mayor, if this position is proven to be something that's not necessary in the future, you can do away with the position, right?
Yes.
So that function of administrators looking at a budget and saying, we only have this much money, we have to put it where it's needed most, they can still perform that function that you mentioned earlier, which is a necessary function. But our only power right now is to create the position, to fund the position. And I think it's a really necessary position. I would move to send this on to the third reading.
Actually, we do have it's been a while, but
I already forgot
have
about
a
it.
motion and a second.
It's already been seconded?
It's been a while. We do have a motion and a second already. Are there any further comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Ventura?
Yes,
Mr.
twice.
Dendinski?
Yes.
Mr. Cowger?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
No.
Mr. Nahorn?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
No.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-2. Item 7C is sent on to the third reading. We'll go to item 8, ordinances and resolutions. Third reading, there are none. Go to item 9, miscellaneous and acknowledgement of the public. Madam Clerk, you have a document which you wish to read.
Yes, this is from Mr. Miller. He is sending this letter to be read this evening. Please accept this mail as my official notice of my resignation from City Council as of December 31st, 2018. I feel honored and proud to have served my residents of Amherst for the past 6 years as an at-large councilman, and I look forward to continuing this service as a state representative in January. Until then, I look forward to carrying out my duties as councilman for the final meetings of 2018. Best wishes, Joe Miller.
Thank you. We need to have a motion and a second to accept his resignation effective December 31st. Mr. Van Truin.
Move to accept Mr. Miller's resignation with congratulations and well wishes.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mr. Winarski.
So moved.
There's a motion and a second to accept the resignation of Mr. Miller effective the 31st of December 2018. Voice vote, please. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Mr. Miller's resignation is accepted in a vote of 7-0 effective the 31st of December. Thank you. Thank you for your service, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam President.
Are there any other items? Anyone else wishing to speak on any subject? Seeing none, we will go on to item 10, agenda requests and committee meeting schedules.
I have no agenda requests this evening, Madam President.
Okay, thank you. Finance, Mr. Cowger.
No items at this time. Please cancel, Madam President.
Thank you. Building and Lands, Mr. Winarski.
Nothing at this time, Madam President.
Streets, Mr. Van Truen.
Nothing at this time, please cancel.
Community Development, Mr. Miller.
No items, please cancel, Madam President.
Executive, Mr. Miller.
No items, please cancel.
Ordinance, Mr. Dembinski.
No items at this time, Madam President, please cancel.
Thank you. Utilities, Mr. Janik.
No items, Madam President, please cancel.
Recycle, Mr. Nahon.
Please keep recycling.
Thank you. Technology, Mr. Dembinski.
No items at this time, Madam President, please cancel.
Thank you. Police and Fire, Mr. Winarski.
Nothing at this time, Madam President.
Thank you. Annexation, Mr. Van Truen.
No items at this time, please cancel.
Thank you very much. Go out to item 11, reports of the administration. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Petek?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe we may be adding an item for next week for finance. The bond anticipation notes we went out for earlier this year for the Lincoln Civil and the sidewalks, that $3 million. We need to pay that off coming in April of next year, so it's coming faster than we all think time will be. And we also are looking at a Cooper Foster project and getting some funding for that to the tune of about $1 million. And then we've reached out to RBC, who is one of our brokers, to help us with this financing. And we're also looking at refinancing the existing 2006 bonds. And so packaging all this together, they'll be able to save us about approximately $27,000 over the life. And so we're going to bring that to council or to committee next week and go through the normal process of 3 readings. We will ask for an emergency on the end of it, just so that we can get the funding and close the deal by mid-February. So there's no immediate rush, but just want to let you know this will be coming next week. And I think I have one other item. There has been a petition going around the city about marijuana use and legislation to go on the ballot next year for the general election. A resident's been pushing this, and it's basically to reduce sentencing and things of that nature when you're pulled over with possession or paraphernalia. The only reason my office has been involved is because anytime something like this comes up from a resident where they're petitioning and get enough signatures to get to the ballot, my office has to hold it for 10 days. That was posted on social media, I think, by the resident. It was in our office for, I believe, over 10 days. And I signed a letter today to have it sent over to the Board of Elections. So the deputy auditor dropped it off over there. So just in case you hear anything about it, our office did hold it. We did nothing with it. We didn't publicize it or anything to that nature. But it should appear on the ballot sometime next year. So that is the end of my report.
Thank you. Mr. Ramsey?
No report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Bakura?
If I get hit by a bus and I'm not here for the final meeting, I want to thank Mr. Miller for his leadership and his friendship, and hopefully we'll have his ear when he's in Columbus. So,
Thank you.
no further report.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffries?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, leaf pickup continues. It's our last week south of the tracks, but please be assured, residents, we're going to stay at it as we always do. We'll be collecting leaves, weather permitting, up into early December. So, and just so folks know, we do rotate containers out, but we've got a pretty long trek. When we fill up a container, we got to take them over near the steel mill to get those containers emptied. So, street department is doing their best, doing a really good job as usual. So, we'll stay at it, be assured. Thank you. End of report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. And just to top about the leaf pickup, that's a huge job. It's probably one of the biggest jobs the city does as far as what we have to do. And the amount of leaves and the amount of roads and the amount of time we pass. So just, I'm asking everybody's patience. We're going to get out there as often as we can and continue to pick those up. I will add, we probably will have a second agenda request item for next week. The developers that were here that are asking for the Beaver Creek Preserve, they've got one more phase at Quarry Lakes, the preserve at Quarry Lakes. So they're asking for those improvements and a very small punch list, so that'll probably be before you next week. And also want to just talk about the press release, which I gave you in committee last week about the utility rates and rolling those back. That press release did go out. It's been in most of the local newspapers. We're working now with our software company, SSI, to try to calculate that credit. I'll be honest, that software, if we had the newer software, this would be a whole lot easier process, but they're probably going to have to write us a program in order to calculate these credits. I'm really hoping that these credits could start showing up for residential customers in January. It's very possible it might not happen to February, but we're going to work on that and get it done as quickly as possible. The large power customers, we're probably going to calculate those manually. We're going to have help with our rate consultant and our help ourselves, so we'll probably have to do each one of those. There's only 50 or 75 of those, so rather than writing a program, it'll be easier for us to do those manually. And then our medium customers, we'll probably have a program written for that. And we're going to work on it. We're going to do a good job as we can with publicizing this. We're going to probably have a letter sent out before these credits. Might be a letter goes out with before the next bill to just talk about the rates being rolled back. So there's going to be a little bit of money spent on notifying customers. And then sometime next year, you know, we're going to have to revisit these increases, and we're going to have to revisit how we do these increases. I don't want any gray areas. I want this ordinance to be written properly. There's a lot of state code, that Ohio Revised Code, that tells how this can get done. I think there can either, you know, we can either completely go by what the state code allows, or we can have some sort of hybrid, but I would like it to be a lot clearer than what we have now, because these rates do need to be adjusted. We can't continue to run at a deficit, and there's a lot of much needed repairs done out there, and we have to raise those capital expenditures for that. So it's painful, but it needs done, and you know, it's going to be a challenge that I promise we'll all work together on to accomplish. And with that, end the report.
So you're going to continue to work on both sides of the tracks with the leaf pickup?
We're going to continue to pick them up best we can, and as often as we can, and as many places as we can. Be patient. We'll get out there at them. The snow, you know, this next few days is going to be hard on us with leaf pickup, but we'll adapt. Our workers will be out there. Our staff will be out there doing the best job absolutely possible.
Thank you very much. Mr. Miller,
Thank you. Move to accept the reports of administration, but I just want to comment, if you don't mind.
let's have a second and then you can comment. Mr. Dubinsky.
Second.
The motion and the second to accept the reports of administration. Comment from Mr. Miller.
I just want to say thank you to the administration, especially when it comes to these two items. One seems so small, but to many residents, your leaf pickup and continuing with that service, that's not something that every city does. And it's nice when our city has that service that we provide, and it's done well. And I, over the years, have begged, and not even had to beg, to be honest with you. I would just beg to our safety service director, Mr. Jeffers, could you please take a look at a certain location? And before I could get probably in the car and arrive at the spot, it was picked up. So it's an amazing job that they do. They do it really well. Please be patient, like was said. I would ask that as well, my constituents as well. Be patient. It'll get done, and it'll get done well. Probably with snow on them, but the trees seem to fall late here in Amherst for whatever reason. And then the rollback, and I really like that you're doing this, that you're trying to set it right, you're trying to go forward in the right way. And I guess tonight has shown that we're all up here trying to do that, and whether we agree or disagree on how we do things. And I hope that after I leave and step to the next role, that you guys continue that. It's really working well. I don't think the Amherst residents sometimes see that, and I appreciate being told, hey, I don't agree with you, and I appreciate when you say why, and you do it in such a professional way. So I will miss that as well. So thank you to everybody around me for all that you do. Thanks. No further comments.
There's a motion and a second to accept the reports of administration. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion was carried 7-0. The reports of the administration are accepted. Mr. Calgar,
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 7-0. We are adjourned at 8:30. Thank you very much.
I got that one.